On the sidewalk in front of a busy store, a little girl tried to sell her sweets. People passed by and pretended she didn't exist. Some even laughed. What no one knew was that this girl had a secret that would change everything. In a small town in the countryside, an orphan girl named Elisa spent much of her childhood on the streets, with few memories of a happy past. Her parents had died when she was very young, and life since then seemed like a constant struggle for survival. Without a fixed home, friends, or support, Elisa was forced to take any small opportunity that came her way. Often, she took shelter in places of mercy, like churches or shelters, where only the most needy sought a bit of comfort. Elisa had a special talent. She knew how to make sweets like no one else. From a very young age, when her mother was still alive, she would watch her mother's skilled hands as she made simple but delicious cakes and sweets. The kitchen was the only place where the girl felt any form of love and affection. However, after the death of her parents, this towel was the only memory she could keep of her mother, and also the only way she found to try to change her life. But life on the streets wasn't easy. Elisa knew that, in order to survive, she would need to find a way to make some money. So she ventured out to sell her sweets in the town squares, at fairs, and sometimes even at the doors of the busiest stores. It was her way of trying to move closer to a better life, to a future that seemed distant. Although the sweets she made with so much care were delicious, the world around her didn't seem to care. One day, she had an idea. There, in the town's main square, there was an expensive store that was always full of people. Elisa knew this would be a good opportunity to try to sell her sweets. The store, with its golden sign and luxurious windows, represented everything she dreamed of achieving one day, a life full of sparkle, success, and recognition. That cold morning, she positioned herself in front of the store with a carefully arranged tray of sweets. The cakes and sweets were shining in the morning sun, and the sweet smell seemed to invite passers-by to stop and try them. Elisa believed that if she could sell a few pieces there, she might be able to gather enough to buy some warm food or, perhaps, even a place to sleep. However, what she didn't expect was the reaction of the people. A group of young people, dressed in designer clothes, passed by her laughing. One of them, bolder than the others, approached the girl with a look of disdain. "Who do you think you are, girl? You're in front of a fancy store. Go away with that trash. Don't you have any shame?" he said, pointing at the sweets. The comment was followed by laughter. Elisa felt her face heat up, not just from embarrassment, but from the bitterness those words provoked in her chest. She didn't understand why she was being humiliated. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just trying to sell the sweets she made, with the best she had. "Go away, you little brat. There's nothing here for you. These cheap sweets aren't welcome here," shouted a woman with a condescending look. Elisa stood still, looking at her sweets that now seemed even humbler, and at those people who seemed so far from her world. She felt the weight of her social status, the harshness of abandonment, the lack of affection. That situation was more than humiliating. She felt a deep pain in her chest, an emptiness that seemed to spread throughout her body. Deep down, she just wanted to be seen as someone with value, someone who deserved respect, someone with dreams and hopes. But there, in that moment, she was simply ignored, despised, and devalued. The group of young people passed by without even looking at her. Elisa, with a heavy heart, picked up her sweets and walked away from the store door. Her eyes were moist, but she refused to cry. At that moment, something inside her ignited. She knew she had to be strong, stronger than the cruel words she had just heard. She didn't know how yet, but something inside her vowed that one day her story would be different. As she walked back to the square, Elisa made a silent promise to herself. "I will show everyone that I can be more than this. I will be the master of my destiny, no matter what happens. I am not invisible." This episode would deeply mark Elisa and serve as fuel for what was yet to come. However, at that moment, she was still an orphan girl, with only her dreams and the hope that something bigger awaited her in the future. Years went by, but the pain of that humiliation never left Elisa. Every time she remembered that morning in front of the store, she felt a mix of anger and sadness. However, the anger began to transform into motivation. She knew she couldn't let herself be defeated. not by people who didn't even know her, nor by a society that ignored her. Elisa wanted more for her life. She wanted to show the world that her origins didn't define her. The orphan girl grew up, and her pain slowly transformed into strength. Elisa worked tirelessly in various jobs, from dishwashing at a local restaurant to helping out at small bakeries. In each place, she learned, observed, and most importantly, did what she did best, baking sweets. With every cake she made, she felt she was getting closer to her dream, closer to rewriting her story. However, the world around her continued to be unforgiving. Elisa knew that, despite having talent and dedication, the road to success would be hard. She had no money or important connections. People around her, even those who employed her, viewed her dreams with skepticism. "It's not for people like you," they would say, with a smile that was part compassion, part disdain. It was as if there was an invisible line separating her from success, a line formed by her social class, her history, her origin. In one of her jobs, Elisa met Marco, a simple man with a big heart. Marco was a renowned chef, but a very modest man. He had grown up in a poor family and knew how hard life could be for people like Elisa. But he also knew that hard work and perseverance could bring rewards. He saw something special in her, not just the talent to make sweets, but the drive and determination. Marco began to mentor her and believe in her potential, something that had never happened before. Together, they decided to open a small pastry business. At first, the work was exhausting and the sales were low. Elisa, still very young, found herself struggling every day to keep the doors open while facing the disbelief of many. Most people didn't believe that a simple pastry shop, created by someone with her background, could stand out. However, Elisa wasn't willing to give up. The beginning was tough, but she persisted. The small pastry shop that she and Marco opened began to gain fame, not for its grandeur, but for the quality of its products. Elisa knew that her sweets were not just desserts. They were pieces of her dream. Each cake, each pie, each cookie came out of the oven full of emotion, a reflection of her search for a better life. However, the city was still a place where prejudice was deeply rooted. While Elisa and Marco's small shop began to gain loyal customers, the disdain and criticism followed them like a shadow. Often, Elisa would hear whispers and giggles as she served customers. "The orphan girl," they would say, as if it were an unwanted label, as if her story condemned her to a future failure. But Elisa had something they couldn't see. She had a heart determined to conquer the world, and her talent grew with each sweet she made. It didn't take long for the business, still small, to begin to prosper. Her dedication and passion for sweets were evident in every slice of cake she delivered. With each order, Elisa felt she was closer to achieving what she had always dreamed of. Still, difficulties were never far away. However, she had already learned how to deal with them. Elisa's biggest struggle wasn't just against others, but against her own fears and insecurities. There were moments when she wondered if she could keep going, if she could keep the business growing. Many times, she found herself questioning whether the world had really changed for her, or she was still just the orphan girl who was once humiliated at the door of an expensive store. The turning point came on an ordinary day when Elisa decided to participate in a local pastry contest. It was a competition that brought together the best pastry chefs in the city, many of them owners of traditional shops, recognized by everyone. Marco, with his ever-hopeful outlook, encouraged her to join, although she had many doubts. "You have what it takes," he said, believing in her potential. When Elisa entered the competition, she was no longer the shy, insecure girl who had started her journey. She was stronger, more prepared, and, above all, more confident. She knew her sweets weren't just delicious. They were an expression of her life journey, a struggle for acceptance, proof that she could be more than her origins. At the end of the contest, Elisa not only won the competition, but earned the respect and admiration of all those who had once doubted her. Her victory was not just over the other pastry chefs, but over the idea that an orphan girl, with no resources and no support, could indeed achieve her dreams and change her life. Now, Elisa knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to fight for every success. The internal conflict she lived, not just with others but with herself, was still present. She knew her story was far from over, and that the future she imagined of owning a vast empire of pastry shops would require more than just culinary skills. It would demand resilience, courage, and above all, confidence in herself. After her victory in the pastry contest, Elisa felt that something in her life had changed forever. She was no longer just an orphan girl trying to survive. She had become a woman with a purpose. From that moment on, the future seemed to open up before her in a promising way, although the journey was far from easy. The victory in the contest brought visibility to her small pastry shop, but it also brought new challenges. Now, she had to deal with the pressure of expanding, the responsibility of making sure success wasn't fleeting, and the constant battle against prejudice and skeptical glances. Elisa knew she needed to broaden her horizons, but doing so meant making a series of tough decisions. She no longer wanted to be just a known pastry chef in the city. She wanted to create something bigger, something that would mark her story and become a reference in the world of gastronomy. She wanted to own the largest chain of pastry shops in the city, and maybe even in the country. Soon, she started looking for investors. But, as always, she faced the challenge of being taken seriously. Many of the investors she approached were skeptical about her success. Some even saw Elisa as just another young woman with an impossible dream, a poor orphan girl who had luck but not the ability to maintain an empire. Once again, she heard words that tried to belittle her story. But instead of being shaken, each rejection only fueled her determination. In one of the most difficult meetings, Elisa found herself face-to-face with a renowned businessman known for funding successful ventures. He was a ruthless man who enjoyed seeing people fight for their place, but rarely gave anyone like Elisa a chance. She entered the meeting with a well-structured plan, full of numbers and projections, but the businessman looked at her with distrust. "Do you think you can manage a chain of pastry shops, having never had a single real investment to start with? What do you have that's different to make people buy your sweets?" he asked gruffly. Elisa felt a chill run down her spine, but instead of being intimidated, she lifted her head. She knew that what could truly make the difference was her passion. What she had wasn't the spreadsheets or the promises. It was in her story and the dedication she put into every sweet she made. "I have something that many others don't. The strength to never give up, to turn every challenge into an opportunity. I won't just sell sweets. I'll create an experience. Every cake I make isn't just food. It's a piece of hope, of overcoming. And that's what people will feel when they buy my products. I'm capable of transforming the simplest ingredients into something extraordinary. And more, my sweets have a story behind them. The story of a girl who had nothing but decided, one day, to fight for everything," she replied, with a firmness that even surprised herself. The businessman remained silent for a few seconds, observing Elisa with a critical eye. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. "You have courage, and that, young lady, is not found in just anyone. I'll give you a chance. But remember, the business world is ruthless. If you don't stand out, I'll withdraw my support quickly. There's no room for failure here." Elisa accepted the proposal. With the businessman's investment, she was able to expand her bakery. But the challenges were far from over. Competition increased, with large bakery chains beginning to take an interest in the market she had conquered. Companies with more resources and power started to emerge, offering sophisticated sweets and aggressive marketing. Elisa found herself in the midst of a real business war, where battles were fought with numbers, advertising, and financial power. However, Elisa didn't let herself be discouraged. Instead of trying to directly compete with the large chains, she decided to focus on what had made her unique: the quality of her products and the personal touch she put into everything she did. Elisa started creating new flavors, mixing local ingredients with traditional recipes, giving a unique twist to her sweets. Additionally, she invested in exceptional customer service, creating a unique shopping experience for her clients. She didn't just want to sell sweets. She wanted to create an experience people would remember and want to repeat. Elisa's differentiator was, without a doubt, her ability to connect customers with her stories. With each new store she opened, she personally engaged with the community, organizing events and collaborating with other local small producers. People began to realize that when they bought from Elisa, they were purchasing more than just a product. They were buying a piece of her journey, a piece of hope. But the greatest challenge was yet to come. One day, the city was hit by a severe economic crisis. Many small businesses began to close their doors, and large chains were taking advantage of the situation to dominate the market. Elisa knew that if she didn't reinvent herself, she would lose everything she had built so far. She spent sleepless nights thinking about how she could keep her bakery alive. It was then that she had a bold idea. She decided to launch a line of sweets focused on wellness and health. Something that would not only meet the needs of a growing audience concerned with healthy eating, but also align with the values she stood for. Elisa began to create cakes and sweets without refined sugar, using organic ingredients and superfoods. She also launched a line of vegan and gluten-free products, something no other competitor had explored with such seriousness. The new line was an absolute success. People, who had previously been more concerned with the economic crisis, now saw Elisa's products as a healthier and more delicious alternative. Sales increased, and with it, Elisa's confidence in her own work. She was finally overcoming all the barriers the world had imposed on her. It was at this moment, when it seemed like everything was lost, that Elisa realized she had overcome the greatest challenge of her life. Not just defeating prejudice and the difficulty of being an orphan fighting for success, but overcoming the fear of not being capable. She had reinvented herself, found her niche, and gained not only the trust of customers, but also the respect of the market. Elisa was now ahead of the largest bakery chain in the city, and her journey had become a true story of overcoming adversity. She had more than a successful business. She had a legion of loyal customers, friends, and a story that inspired those who knew her. However, Elisa's greatest triumph was not in the number of stores she owned or the size of her business network, but in the personal transformation she had experienced. She knew there was still much to conquer, but somehow she felt complete. The weight of being the orphan girl seemed to have dissipated over time, and Elisa was no longer defined by the circumstances of her childhood. She had created something that could not be destroyed, something that didn't depend on money, status, or other people's opinions. She had created something with her heart. Elisa's success began to be recognized in various spheres. She was invited to speak about entrepreneurship at major events and became seen as a mentor for other young entrepreneurs. At one of these events, she met others who, like her, came from humble backgrounds but were trying to conquer the impossible. Elisa was moved to realize that her story now inspired others to believe in themselves, just as she had to learn to believe. But not all success came without a price. Elisa found herself distant from some friends and family who had been by her side in the beginning. The business world, with its demands and commitments, made her sometimes lose sight of her true purpose. She felt that, too often, she was more focused on numbers and results than on the things that really mattered, the people and the stories she helped tell through her sweets. In a moment of reflection, Elisa decided to take a break and reconnect with her roots. She traveled to the orphanage where she spent her childhood, now transformed into a support center for underprivileged children. When she arrived, the faces of the old caregivers were still fresh in her memory. They were simple people who had always believed in her, even when no one else did. It was for those people that Elisa wanted to give back everything she had achieved. When visiting the children, Elisa realized something fundamental. Although she had achieved success, her greatest legacy would not be the bakery empire, but the ability to help shape a better future for the new generations. She then founded an organization that offered scholarships to children from underprivileged communities, in addition to creating training programs for young entrepreneurs who wanted to open their own businesses. Elisa felt that by investing in the future of these children and young people, she was finally giving true meaning to her own journey. Time passed, and Elisa saw her bakery network grow even more. She now had branches in several cities, and her sweets became a national reference. But looking at what she had achieved, Elisa understood that the true treasure lay in the lives she touched, in the stories of overcoming that emerged around her. Her bakeries became spaces where people of all ages could find more than just a good sweet. They found a symbol that, regardless of their background, anyone had the ability to transform their life. When Elisa looked back and remembered the orphan girl, humiliated at the door of a shop, she smiled. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because she had learned that the scars didn't define her. They were marks of struggle that strengthened her and prepared her to achieve what seemed impossible. Every fall, every challenge, every no she received became a driving force for her rise. And that's how she built an empire, not of cakes and sweets, but of dreams and opportunities. And like every great story of overcoming adversity, Elisa's didn't end there. She knew that, as long as she lived, she would continue to fight, teach, and inspire. Her story was proof that no matter how much the world tries to bring you down, there's always room to start over, change direction, and turn pain into victory. Elisa's legacy was not just that of owning the largest bakery chain in the city. Her true legacy was in what she represented. The hope that anyone, regardless of their background, could fight for their place in the world. And no matter how tough life was, there would always be the opportunity to make it sweet and unforgettable.